Salam Satu Malaysia. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Razali Ismail, Chairman of GMMF. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Hasmi Agam, Chairman of Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SWACAM. Dato' Rizwan Kushairi, Board of Trustees, Global Movement of Moderates. Dato' Nicholas Jeffrey, former President of the American Chambers of Commerce Malaysia. Dato' Dr. Ahmad Faizal Muhammad Firdaus, President of Mercy Malaysia. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and representative of missions in Kuala Lumpur, experts, my beloved brothers and sisters. First and foremost, I would like to, on behalf of GMMF, I would like to thank everyone who are present in this gathering this morning and welcome you all to the GMMF Stakeholders Roundtable discussion. This is not going to be very formal. we would want to start as quickly as possible, but before I do that, if I may draw your kind attention to the program schedule that we have distributed to everyone in this hall. We will start this morning with a discussion with 4 members on the panel. This is basically to start the ball rolling, and then it's going to be an open session for Q&A or interventions. And then we will have a break, a short, take 5 kind of thing. There will be coffee and tea outside. And then we will go to the opening ceremony, if you like. The Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yang Berhormat Dato' Hamzah Zainuddin, will be coming. He might even be coming earlier, but it's confirmed that he will be coming, but it's not confirmed whether he will be coming as early as 11 o'clock. So the reason I'm saying this is because we will then, as he comes, he will sit and listen. He probably wants to make some intervention. It's really up to him. Then we will do the closing here. Then we will go for lunch. So we will try to keep our time within the framework, and then we can, so that the lunch can be more casual. Yeah. So because in the original program is like going to be a very formal lunch. We will try to change that. Now, before we start with the panel, let me just say a few words. Now, our objective today is simply to meet among all stakeholders, both from Malaysia and from overseas, in order to enhance people-to-people diplomacy through our networking, through our sharing, through perhaps collaboration in the future, among all of us, stakeholders, the state, the business, and the civil society. If I can just say, the 3 things that we want to take home from today's meeting would be: number 1, moderation as a principle of life, and moderation as a principle in foreign policy as promoted by Dr. Sri Najib, our Prime Minister. The main objective is, of course, to realize a more peaceful world. The second take-home thing would be a greater awareness among stakeholders that there is such thing as people-to-people diplomacy. It's not a new thing, but it is growing in terms of its importance in foreign policies and in foreign affairs. And the third thing that we want to take home is a starting of a stakeholders network, probably called foreign policy stakeholders, for lack of a better way of saying it at the beginning. This is in in no way trying to impinge on anybody's role, but it is people, civil society in particular, talking among ourselves, sharing ideas, and trying to shape the debate. Bearing in mind that foreign policy is also in transition, partly because of the new realities that is occurring before our own eyes. In fact, we are already living in some kind of new realities. And if I can, at least in my way of looking at the new realities, there are at least three things. Number one, the advent of the ICT and new media. Second is the emerging new kind of social consciousness, which result in new kind of social movement, which are non-traditional, non-conventional, non-formal, but very, very powerful, especially because if they move on the social media or if they use social media as a platform. And the third new reality is we are moving into the third stage or the third phase of democracy, where people are no longer talking about simply the traditional instruments of democracy, but people are now talking about new theories of democracy like deliberative democracy, participatory democracy. Whether that is good or bad, that's another story, but I think these are some of, if not all of the new realities that we are facing. To the extent that there are now authors like Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, both are members of the Council for Foreign Relations. They co-authored a book titled The New Digital Age, and among others they say that we are moving from the Cold War to Code War, referring to the ICT and the new media, and perhaps in future governments may have two kinds of foreign policy, one that is formal and the other one that is digital. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, those are just to start, warming up. Please, for those of you who are on Twitter, we are now live tweeting. There are among us young people. I must acknowledge, because there are so many of us here from different organizations, but I must acknowledge a couple of people who are probably the youngest among us all. Can I recognize the hands of people representing Selangor Model United Nations? Yes, they are among the youngest. They are real young ones. Thank you for coming. Sorry, the other guys, I don't think we qualify to be among the youngest in this room. Though I know people like Tasir Zali and many of us still feel that we are very, very much young at heart. Tasir, yes. Okay. We have four distinguished speakers, which really need no introduction, but I still would like to say a few lines. Our first speaker this morning will be Ambassador Dato' Rizwan Kushairi. He is one of our Board of Trustees, was serving the Malaysian diplomatic service from 1972 to 1996. The last post held by him was as Malaysian Ambassador to Uzbekistan, and was also serving as Deputy Permanent Representative at our mission in the United Nations. He is also Deputy Chairman of the Foreign Policy Study Group. He will be speaking to us on the role of CSO. Our second speaker would be Dr. Ahmad Faizal Muhammad Firdaus, President of Mercy Malaysia. He's a physician, a medical specialist by profession, have got a lot of vast experience with humanitarian work overseas, like in Sri Lanka, Iran, Sudan, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Myanmar. Our third speaker will be Dato' Nicholas Zafri, the past president of the American Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, representing the business sector. He may look like he is not Malaysian, but he has been staying in Malaysia. He considers himself to be a Malaysian. In fact, he has been very, very much involved in the formulation of the National Economic Advisory, he's part of the National Economic Advisory Council and also a member of PEMUDA, the Special Task Force to facilitate business. Our final speaker will be Tan Sri Hasmiagam, chairperson of Sohakam, a career diplomat, twice president of the UN Security Council when Malaysia was a member back in 1999-2000, and he has just came back from Geneva, attending the United Nations Human Rights Council's UPR, Universal Periodic Review. He probably wants to share with us some of the whatever that he wants to. So we will allow each of the speakers about 8 to 10 minutes. I wouldn't want to say about 10 minutes, then they will go 12 minutes. Yeah. There is no bell here, but we will be very sharp in watching the clock, if you like. We are also live streaming on our website, gmof.org. Yeah. So, guys, as we proceed, if you are if you're online, you can go streaming. If you're on Twitter, please carry on twittering. And for those of you who are twittering, please also tag my Twitter handle, Saifuddin ABD, as you go doing that. Can I have the pleasure of inviting our first speaker, Dr. Rizwan Keshari, sir?
Thank you very much, Saifuddin, for the introduction, and above all for this initiative in engaging the civil society organizations and others, and the youth, of course. Moderation, which is the concept behind the global movement of moderates, is one of those motherhood concepts for mankind, and is one of the fundamental beliefs of religions and philosophers. The initiative by Prime Minister Najib on the global movement of moderate is a laudable effort and timely, as our world is facing serious political and economic crisis with the continuing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan following the US invasion, internal conflicts relating to the Arab Spring, the civil war in Syria getting worse by the day, the ongoing serious political crisis, the worst since the Great Depression of the 30s, and the big power shift from a unipolar, multipolar world with the rise of China, India, reassertion of Russia as a major power, and the rise of BRICS as a group, and the replacement of G7, G8 with the G20. I consider moderation is a way of life that encompasses political, economic, social, cultural, and religious dimensions. Unfortunately, following the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers in New York and Pentagon, and the subsequent US war on terror, the media has been highlighting and associating acts of terror by terrorists with Islam. But acts of terror are committed by extremists belonging to other religions and causes as well. There are also other dimensions of extremism which should be a cause of concern for us as well. For example, globalization in its present form, driven by the big powers, multinational corporations, and international institutions, which have been pushing for more and more trade and financial liberalization, for structural changes and political transformation, have caused so much hardships and unhappiness around the world. The rich are getting richer and the poor much poorer. It has created unhealthy divisions in nations and within nations. Millions are out of work and the future looks bleak. In addition, tendencies by powerful nations to use force and abandoning the United Nations process, breaking human rights principles in the war on terror, using drones to kill terrorists, but ending up killing many innocent women and children, and spying on their allies, including heads of government, all of which can hardly be described as moderate actions. I've been following the roles and activities of civil society organizations in ASEAN, and I'm glad that the GMMF Secretariat has circulated the presentation which I did on CSOs in ASEAN, which I presented at an ASEAN Day last year. The presentation contains some useful information about the role and activities of CSOs in ASEAN and relationship between governments and ASEAN with the CSOs. I believe that CSOs as non-state actors have a very useful role to play in their countries and in promoting ASEAN communities. The roles have been elaborated in the paper, but I would like to underline the importance of the role of CSOs in national reconciliation and in conflict resolutions. The Prime Minister and the GMM Foundation have done a lot of work in promoting and canvassing support for the concept of moderation at the UN, the ASEAN Summit, the ASEAN-EU Summit, and at the Non-Aligned Movement Summit. However, for GMM to be successful and enduring, it must engage the people and work with the CSOs, which will hopefully work together with the GMM Foundation to continue to champion and actualize moderation as a way of life amongst youth and adults in urban and rural areas, in schools, colleges and universities, in SMEs and big corporations, and among social groups using social media and the internet. The GMM could organize itself and do a kind of civil society functions along the lines of Rotary and Lions clubs, but with initiatives, coordinating and organizational work by a group of like-minded CSOs and some funding from the big corporations as part of their social corporate responsibility. And the key problem is facing CSOs in funding, not only in Malaysia, but in other ASEAN countries as well. And in Malaysia, for example, Malaysians and Malaysian big corporations have yet to appreciate the constructive role of CSOs, and hence many prominent CSOs are funded by foreign international CSOs, foundation and philanthropic organizations. I remember last year when we had the ASEAN seminar on the role of CSOs. It was also a hot topic then when some quarters were criticizing or took issue with the fact that some CSOs are being funded by international and foreign bodies. And this is sad, as I'm also with Foreign Policy Study Group, I was chairman as Tan Sri Razali, and we believe in people-to-people diplomacy, people-to-people engagement, and we ourselves are funded by a foreign organization, philanthropic organization. CSOs can also help the GMM Foundation to blunt some of the sharp edges and internal contradictions in Malaysia, some with extremist overtones which undermine the work of the GMM Foundation and our efforts to promote moderation as a way of life in Malaysia, ASEAN and globally. For CSOs to realize the potentials for good, there must be a democratic space where exchanges of ideas are tolerated, if not encouraged, and where dissenting views are not seen automatically as anti-government and a security threat. What we would like to see is a healthy and constructive engagement, dialogue and collaboration between the CSOs and the government, so that we can together move forward and promote global movement of moderates. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dato. Now everybody use the term CSO. Last time it used to be NGO and NPO, but there were many kinds of NGOs, non-government organizations, Congos, or Gongos, or Jingos, government interest NGO Jingos. Congos, corporate-oriented NGOs, so they call themselves Congos. But now we also have Comango. I don't want to go into that. We can discuss that later. Chris, I can see you are smiling. Can we now invite our second speaker, Dr. Ahmad Faizal, Masih Malaysia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi, and a very good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I will not pretend to represent the entire NGO community. It is impossible to do so, and the entire civil society community, both here in Malaysia or abroad. I, however, would like to share a few of our experiences and perhaps some views which may be relevant to what we're discussing today. I've been asked by Saifuddin to actually talk about two things in particular. One is the role of civil society towards achieving this common agenda which we put forward today. And secondly is the role of civil society, at least some civil society, in enhancing people-to-people diplomacy externally, even internationally. Well, before I go there are perhaps a few things which we need to take into account. Number one, we have to accept and acknowledge that society, especially in Malaysia, and even in the ASEAN region as a whole, but especially in Malaysia since we are here, is still evolving and still in evolution. And we have to take that into very deep account because it's not only evolving forwards, some would argue, I think, that in some aspects, we're also evolving backwards. I think people like Halimah will say that 30 years ago, we were probably a little bit more advanced in terms of our perception of how education should be in Malaysia. But then again, there are other factors abound. Then the second point is, what is moderate, ladies and gentlemen? What is moderate to you? And what is moderate to me? And what is moderate that is common to all? And I would put it to you that there is a little bit of difference there, although we could perhaps put some red lines and boundaries. Yeah? Just like one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, sometimes. A person's moderate view can be also seen or perceived to be not so moderate sometimes by some others. Yeah? However, putting red lines, I think, where moderation is important. For example, I don't think anyone here will disagree with me if we were to put it down firmly and very, very strongly that racism is definitely not moderate. Okay? There is no such thing in this world as a moderate racist. Can you show me one? If there is, I'd like to see him or her. Okay? There is no such thing as a moderate racist. If you're a racist, full stop. Okay? You can't be calling yourself, I'm a racist, but I'm moderate. Okay. Right. It's like you're a serial killer, but I'm doing it for a good reason. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so that's the second prerequisite. The third one is, in Malaysia at least, and perhaps even in the wider ASEAN region, and even in the wider Asian region, we have to accept that for some parts, sometimes and occasionally, political parties sometimes do not qualify as civil society organizations, depending on the situation and the segment of society that they are talking to, or the issue that is at hand. In Malaysia, I think since 2008, things have moved on a bit, alhamdulillah, yeah, and we have more cohesion and more participation now. I'm glad to see, for example, that the MACC's board now includes both members from the ruling coalition as well as from the opposition coalition. The PAC committee in Parliament, for example, is also strongly represented by both sides of the aisle, and this is something that is now more cohesive and coherent as opposed to perhaps 10 years ago, when even if it was just a token measure. Yeah. But still, it's still evolving. We're not there yet, yeah, but we're getting there, hopefully, inshallah. So, there'll be many things to discuss, but I'd like to just focus on the principles. Role of civil society towards achieving this common moderation agenda. I think the main roles would be for us in civil society organizations, regardless of whether we are NGOs, Congos, Gongos, whatever, to be voices of calm, voices of reason, voices of tolerance, and voices that can accept and manage diversity, voices that advocate for accepting differences in opinion and agreeing to disagree, and disagreeing sometimes in a polite and constructive way. The role of civil society perhaps also is to advocate, and sometimes you have to advocate for something you believe in, and advocate for issues of common interest. The trick is perhaps to know when to advocate for it publicly and when sometimes to do it behind closed doors. Again, looking at the reality of the situation. On the other hand, you would argue that if we were to be too cautious about it, then we'll discuss nothing publicly. Of course, we should. And YB Zairil will not be happy if we were to discuss everything behind closed doors. We should be discussing corruption openly, for example. But perhaps some of the mechanisms, we could do it behind closed doors. So those are the things that we need to advocate for. But civil society has a role to play, and for each organization, it is up to that organization to position itself, to mandate itself, and carry out that mandate as its position allows. And of course, all this has to go forward towards achieving that peace and prosperity. There are perhaps three things then that are key to all this, which is tolerance, inclusivity, and the notion of exclusivity when it is appropriate. Sometimes, however, in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, and even sometimes within the same religion in Malaysia, some issues are better discussed exclusively. Not all, a few. But mostly we should push the boundaries. Now, with regards to how NGOs can play a role in, or other civil society organizations can play a role in forwarding the agenda of people-to-people diplomacy, there are three main points. Number one is that CSOs, especially in a country like Malaysia, should take a proactive stance on issues which affect not only ourselves, people here in Malaysia, but also people abroad, especially in countries which are near to us. Secondly, it is important to note that it is not just to CSOs like Mercy Malaysia, which has a bulk of its work internationally, and therefore we are very well positioned, perhaps, to engage in people-to-people diplomacy abroad. However, it is also pertinent to note that the behavior and the general stance and posture of CSOs and society overall in the country also affects perception of Malaysia and CSOs like Mercy Malaysia, which works abroad. For example, whenever we go abroad, most of the time, people remember a few things. And we are touched when they say, oh, you know, when we go somewhere in the field and they say, where are you from? Malaysia? Oh, good. The first thing that they will say, it's good. If we go to a Muslim country that is at war, and there are many which are, they will say again the same thing, and how they wish that their countries were a little bit more like Malaysia. On the other hand, the other thing which they perhaps remember also are some of our leaders, past and present, and what they've done. And I put it to you that that people remember leaders on both sides of the aisle abroad, not just from one side. And it's very, very important, therefore, how we carry ourselves in our own country. If we behave unlike moderates in Malaysia, it is very, very unlikely that people will continue to have that kind of respect for us abroad. I'll just give you a few examples of how people-to-people diplomacy can work, especially in difficult situations. Earlier this year, of course, we had that unfortunate Lahad Datu incursion in Sabah. Mercy Malaysia assisted in some of the relief efforts behind the scenes in Lahad Datu. But little did other people know, and we did not publicize it for obvious reasons, that we were also, at the very same time, we had a team on the ground in Mindanao. The reason why we didn't publicize it was because we thought it will not be very smart to do it in the Malaysian mainstream media at that particular time, because we thought that the understanding of what is Sulu and what is Mindanao, what is Sultan Kiram and what is the MILF with whom we were working with, would not be within the reach of a lot of people, and sentiments would be very much negative at that time. Yeah. But actually, even at the height of the Lahad Datu incursion, there was people-to-people contact in a positive way between Malaysians and Filipinos, southern Filipinos, Moros, not the people who were going on to do the incursion in Lahad Datu, but other Moros, the MILF, for example, who are involved in the peace process primarily, and we were getting along very well. Muslim Malaysia also in concert with the MTCP, previously of the Prime Minister's Department, now with the Foreign Ministry, Wisma Putra, yearly on an annual basis organizes a South-to-South training session for people from all over the global south. And in disaster preparedness, as well as, oops, that's my time. I have to put the timer for 10 minutes, otherwise I'll go over. And last but not least, in Myanmar, where we have been there for the last 5 years now, since Cyclone Nargis, Muslim Malaysia has been able to become the bridge in Rakhine between the central government in Yangon, as well as the state Rakhine government and civil society. We're one of the very few NGOs who are allowed to work there on a regular and consistent basis. Now, the reason why Muslim Malaysia and not a lot of the Western NGOs, a lot of the Western international humanitarian NGOs who have a budget 100 times bigger than ours, and also, sadly, and it is something that we are also advocating for, not NGOs from Muslim countries, which the Yangon government has, however, a slightly negative perception towards. It is because, over the last 5 years, we have been able to cultivate an appearance and a perception of acceptability. What we call in the humanitarian lingo, a good non-belligerent status. We are not belligerent. We are not seen to be on one side or the other. And in Rakhine, in view of that stance, practically what we do is we actually help both the Rakhine Buddhist community as well as the Rohingyas. It will not work if we were to do good for just one side. Although we know that one side needs it more than the other, and we know there are other pressing issues. This is just an example, ladies and gentlemen. Last but not least, I guess, I'd like to close by saying that there are also times when CSOs have to be firm. It's not all about moderate. Again, it depends on what moderate means here. Moderate, I don't think, means also that we have to just sit back and accept. Sometimes CSOs do need to advocate, do need to give out a strong voice. But when to do so? It is when there are pressing issues which challenges the concept of diversity, of moderation, of living together harmoniously, as well as taking firm stands within our own. And this is something which perhaps CSOs in a developing, evolving society like Malaysia can do to perhaps put a little bit of pressure on, for example, the government or even leaders of different political parties perhaps, to actually come down hard when people of their own parties do things which are not really reflective of what they say. It is well and good that you have a very big stand from, for example, the leaders of all the political parties or from the leader of the government, that we are a moderate country and we are going forward with a moderate agenda. But it sounds very hollow when the very next day somebody from your own side says something, oh, absolutely, that contradicts that. And this happens all the time. And of course, in Malaysia, we have this way of doing it, the Malaysian way, so we either keep quiet, let it pass, and not say anything. But as Dr. Saifuddin rightly pointed out, this is a new era, ladies and gentlemen. We have globalization and we have ICT. What happens today, anywhere in the world, we will know today. It used not to be that way. Yeah? There is no government, no authority, no political party, and not even no CSO, no NGO that can do anything anymore without anyone else finding you out. Sooner or later, you will be found out. Yeah? It really is not very smart to actually keep saying one thing and doing another. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that's enough for the initial part, and thank you very much again.
Thank you.